A Hell's Angel found his only daughter, searching through trash on Christmas Eve, and the truth stunned him. The winter wind cut through Mark Calder's leather jacket as he guided his motorcycle into the empty parking lot behind Eddie's diner. Snow was falling harder now, coating the cracked asphalt in a thin white blanket that crunched beneath his boots as he dismounted. The diner's neon sign had long gone dark, its windows black against the gray evening sky. He was about to head back to his bike when movement caught his eye. There, beside the diner's overflowing dumpster, a small figure hunched over in the gathering darkness. Mark's muscles tensed instinctively. Years on the road had taught him to treat unexpected encounters with caution. The figure shifted, and the dim security light revealed a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, methodically sorting through scattered papers and garbage. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite the bitter cold, she wore only a thin jacket over what looked like a school sweatshirt. Mark watched as she examined each scrap of paper with careful attention before either tucking it into a worn backpack or letting it fall back to the snow. There was something purposeful about her movements. This wasn't desperate scavenging, but a deliberate search. His boots crunched in the snow as he approached, maintaining enough distance to avoid startling her. "Kind of cold to be out here, kid." The girl's head snapped up, her body going still. But instead of fear, her eyes showed sharp intelligence as she assessed him. Despite his imposing frame and the club patches on his jacket, she didn't back away. "I'm fine," she said firmly, turning back to her task. "You can move along." Mark didn't move. Something about her determined focus, and the way she shivered despite her obvious effort to hide it, tugged at him. "Listen, if you need help, there's a shelter over on 5th that—" "I'm not homeless," she cut him off, straightening to face him fully. In the weak light, he could see her features more clearly now, young but wearing an expression far older than her years. "I'm looking for something specific." "In a dumpster? On Christmas Eve?" She sighed, clearly deciding whether to elaborate. Finally, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small stack of papers protected in a plastic sleeve. "These are receipts and notes my mom left behind. She used to work here and at other places around town. I'm trying to find more. There's something I need to understand." The simple statement carried the weight of deeper meaning, and Mark found himself unable to walk away as he'd planned. The girl's quiet determination and the grief he glimpsed behind her words struck an unexpected chord. "You got a name?" he asked, his gruff voice softening slightly. "Lily," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "And you don't need to worry about me. I can take care of myself." Mark nodded, recognizing the hard-earned pride in her voice. But as another gust of wind swept through the parking lot, carrying stinging snow, he noticed her shoulders trembling despite her attempts to appear unaffected. "Maybe," he said slowly, "but everybody can use a hand sometimes, even just to hold a flashlight while you look." Lily studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against whatever instincts had kept her safe, so far. The diner's security light flickered, casting shifting shadows across their faces as snow continued to fall in the growing darkness. Lily zipped her backpack open again and carefully pulled out more plastic sleeves filled with paper. Her fingers, red from the cold, trembled slightly as she showed them to Mark. "See these?" She pointed to a collection of coffee-stained receipts and order tickets. "My mom worked at 6 different diners in town over the years. She kept leaving little notes everywhere, sometimes on napkins, sometimes on the backs of receipts. I've been trying to piece it all together since she passed." Mark's expression softened as he watched her handle the papers with such care. "When did she—" He left the question unfinished. 3 months ago." Lily's voice was steady, but her eyes stayed fixed on the papers. Cancer. It happened pretty fast. The wind whipped around them, rattling the diner's metal garbage cans. Mark glanced at his motorcycle, then back at the shivering teenager. Listen, I've got a thermos of coffee in my saddlebag. Still hot? Let me grab it. Lily hesitated, but nodded. Mark strode to his bike and returned with a battered silver thermos. He poured the steaming coffee into the cap and handed it to her. She wrapped her cold hands around it gratefully. My mom worked here the longest, Lily continued after taking a careful sip. Almost 2 years. The owner, Mr. Heller, he was kind to her. But something made her leave suddenly. She pulled out another receipt, this one with cramped handwriting along its edge. She wrote things like this everywhere, little breadcrumbs, like she wanted someone to find them someday. Mark leaned closer to see in the dim light. The handwriting was faded but clear. Always do what's right, even when it costs you everything. There are dozens more like this, Lily said, taking another sip of coffee. Some are just dates and places. Some are like little messages. I've been collecting them for weeks, trying to understand. She gestured to the remaining trash bags. This diner's closing for good next week. Everything's getting tossed. If there's anything else here, it'll be buried under the snow by morning. Mark looked at the pile of garbage bags, then at Lily's determined face. The snow was falling faster now, already covering the papers scattered on the ground. He shrugged off his leather jacket and handed it to her. Put this on, he said gruffly. Can't search if your fingers freeze off. Lily stared at him for a moment, then slipped the oversized jacket over her thin sweater. It hung past her knees, but the warmth was immediate. I'll take this side, Mark said, moving toward one end of the dumpster. You take that side. We'll work through these bags before they're covered completely. He pulled a small flashlight from his jeans pocket and clicked it on. What exactly are we looking for? Anything with her handwriting, Lily replied, already reaching for another trash bag. Receipt books, order pads, napkins with notes. My mom's name was Elena Reyes. Mark nodded and began carefully sorting through the refuse, watching from the corner of his eye as Lily meticulously examined each scrap of paper she found. The snow continued to fall around them in the growing darkness, but neither seemed to notice as they worked in companionable silence, searching for traces of Elena's story in the discarded remains of the dying diner. The security light above the diner's back door buzzed and flickered, casting uneven shadows across the snow-dusted pavement. Mark and Lily had worked through several bags already, creating neat piles of paper, receipts in one stack, order slips in another, and miscellaneous notes in a third. Lily's methodical sorting suddenly stopped. She held up a receipt torn at one corner, squinting at it in the unreliable light. The paper was yellow with age, its edges soft and worn, like it had been handled many times before being discarded. This is different, she said, her voice quiet but excited. She turned the receipt over, revealing handwriting that wasn't confined to the margins this time. There's something written across the whole back. Mark moved closer, directing his flashlight beam onto the paper. The writing was hurried but clear, as if the writer had been anxious to get the words down before losing their nerve. Lily's fingers traced over the faded ink. It's dated 8 years ago. She leaned in closer, reading aloud. He'll keep his word. Grimm always does. Remember this place. Remember his kindness. The flashlight beam wavered slightly as Mark's hand tensed. Grimm, Lily repeated, looking up at Mark. That's a biker name, isn't it? Like a road name? Mark didn't answer immediately. His face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My mom mentioned a biker once, Lily continued, her words coming faster now. Just once when she was really tired. She said someone called Grimm helped her when she was in trouble. When she was pregnant with me. She held the receipt closer to the light. This has to be about the same person. The security light flickered again, briefly plunging them into darkness before sputtering back to life. In that moment, Mark had gone completely still. "That's my name," he said finally, his voice rough. "Grim. It's what they call me." Lily's eyes widened. She looked down at the receipt, then back at Mark's face. "You?" she asked. "You're the one who helped her?" "There must be some mistake," Mark said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "When was your mother here? What year?" "She worked here just before I was born," Lily answered. Her hands were steady as she pulled out her folder of collected papers. "I have the exact dates here somewhere. Mom kept everything organized." She flipped through the plastic sleeves with practiced efficiency. "Here. She started in March, 15 years ago." Mark ran a hand over his face, his expression troubled. "I was here then," he admitted. "Used to stop at this diner regular." "Mom said the biker who helped her was different from the others. She said he made sure she stayed safe when she needed it most." Lily's voice grew stronger, more certain. "That was you, wasn't it? You're Grim." The security light hummed overhead, casting stark shadows across Mark's face as he struggled with memories he'd long tried to forget. The receipt in Lily's hand seemed to carry the weight of all those intervening years, of choices made and secrets kept. "Your mother," Mark said slowly. "She had dark hair? Worked the overnight shift?" "Yes," Lily answered immediately. "And she always wore a silver cross necklace, always." Mark's expression shifted then, recognition and something deeper washing over his features. The truth of Elena's message stared up at them from that worn receipt, inescapable in the harsh glare of the security light. Snow continued to fall in lazy spirals as Lily and Mark settled on the diner's back steps. She brushed away the powder with her gloved hand, making space for them both. The concrete was cold, but neither seemed to notice. "Mom didn't talk about that time much," Lily began, pulling her coat tighter. "But sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she'd tell me bits and pieces." She took out her worn notebook, its pages stuffed with collected scraps. "I wrote everything down." Mark sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "She was working here when she found out she was pregnant with me," Lily continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the memories. "Said there were men looking for her, dangerous men. She never told me why." She flipped through her notebook with careful fingers. "But she always mentioned this one biker who noticed something was wrong." "Lots of bikers came through here back then," Mark said quietly, his eyes fixed on the falling snow. "This one was different." Lily's tone grew more confident. "She said he'd leave extra tips under his coffee cup, way more than the meal cost. Started showing up during her late shifts when the rough crowds came in." She paused, looking down at her notes. "Mom said just having him there, sitting at the counter, kept the trouble away." Mark's shoulders tensed slightly. "Your mother, Elena, she worked the graveyard shift?" "So you do remember her," Lily said quickly, turning to face him. "I remember a waitress named Elena," Mark admitted reluctantly. "That's all." Lily pressed on, her words coming faster now. "Mom said this biker arranged things with the owner, Mr. Heller. Made sure she got safer shifts, made sure someone walked her to her car at night." She pulled out another carefully preserved note. She wrote that he never asked for anything in return. Just watched out for her until... Until what? Until she disappeared. Lily's voice grew quieter. "She packed us up one night and left town. Never said why, just that it wasn't safe anymore." She looked directly at Mark. "But she kept every receipt from every time you came in, every single one." Mark stood abruptly, brushing snow from his jeans. "You're reaching for connections that aren't there." Mom said the biker who helped her had a tattoo on his right hand. Lily persisted. A compass rose, just like yours. Mark instinctively covered his hand. Lot of bikers have tattoos. Mr. Heller still lives in town, Lily said, rising to stand beside him. He'd remember. He'd know the truth. Frank Heller? Mark's voice carried a note of recognition. He owns the hardware store now. It's not far. Lily gathered her papers carefully, protecting them from the snow. He's probably still there, getting ready for tomorrow's Christmas sale. Mark looked down at the receipt still clutched in Lily's hand, at the words that had changed everything. Grimm always keeps his word. Fine, he said finally. We'll talk to Frank. But don't. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Don't expect the answers you're hoping for. Lily nodded, but her expression remained determined as she followed Mark through the snowy parking lot. The security light cast their shadows long across the fresh powder. A teenage girl and a weathered biker, connected by a 15-year-old receipt and the promise of truth waiting at a hardware store. The stairs leading to Frank Heller's apartment creaked under their feet as Mark and Lily climbed to the second floor. Yellow light seeped through the crack beneath his door, a sign someone was still awake despite the late hour. Mark's knuckles hesitated inches from the worn wood. Maybe this isn't... But Lily had already stepped forward and knocked firmly 3 times. Shuffling sounds came from inside, followed by muttered words. The door opened a crack, revealing Frank Heller's weathered face, his gray hair disheveled from sleep. We're closed, he grumbled, starting to close the door. Then his eyes focused on Mark, and all color drained from his face. Jesus Christ. Hello, Frank, Mark said quietly. Frank's gaze darted between Mark and Lily, understanding dawning in his tired eyes. Should have known this day would come. He opened the door wider. Better come in before you freeze out there. The apartment was small but tidy, with Christmas cards lined up on a shelf and a tiny artificial tree in the corner. Frank gestured toward his kitchen table, where a half-empty coffee cup and yesterday's newspaper sat. Sit, he ordered, though his voice trembled slightly. He remained standing, leaning against his counter for support. What brings you here on Christmas Eve? Lily pulled out the old receipt, now protected in a plastic sleeve. I found this tonight, in the diner's trash. Frank put on his reading glasses with shaking hands, squinting at the faded paper. His expression softened. Elena's handwriting, clear as day. You remember her? Lily asked. Course I do. Best waitress I ever had. Frank sank heavily into a chair. Worked hard, never complained, even when she was expecting. He looked at Mark. Even when she was scared. Mark's jaw tightened. Frank. No. Frank shook his head. No more secrets. Been carrying this one too long. He turned to Lily. Your mother was in trouble. Bad trouble. The kind that follows you. What kind of trouble? Lily leaned forward. Never knew the details. Didn't want to know. Frank's fingers drummed nervously on the table. But I knew she needed help when he came to me. He nodded toward Mark. What did he do? Lily whispered. Frank's eyes grew distant with memory. Came in late one night. Laid out more cash than I'd ever seen. Said it was for Elena's protection. Better shifts, safe walks to her car, extra eyes watching out. He swallowed hard. Said if anything happened to her or the baby, he'd hold me responsible. The baby, Lily repeated softly. Me. You. Frank looked at her properly now. Got your mother's eyes, you do. Same quiet strength. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's enough. No, Frank's voice found its strength. She deserves the truth. You paid me to keep them safe, Mark. Paid me to make sure that girl grew up." He gestured at Lily. "Well, there she is, growing up just fine." The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. Lily's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Mark stood rigid by the window, his reflection fractured in the frost-covered glass. "Why did you help her?" Lily asked Mark, her voice barely audible. Before Mark could answer, Frank spoke again. "Because that's who he is. Behind all that leather and those tattoos, he's the one who shows up when someone needs protecting." He looked at Mark with something like respect. "Even if it means walking away after." The kitchen's single overhead light cast long shadows across Frank's worn linoleum floor. Steam rose from the fresh cups of coffee Frank had insisted on making, though no one reached to drink. The truth hung heavy in the air, thicker than the building snow outside. Lily's fingers traced the plastic sleeve holding her mother's receipt. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Mom used to say something about papers leaving trails. That's why she kept everything. Receipts, notes, old calendars. She said sometimes the truth needs proof to be believed." Mark remained by the window, his broad shoulders tense. His reflection showed a man caught between staying and fleeing. "She was right about that," Frank muttered, settling deeper into his chair. "Truth's a funny thing. Sometimes it hides in plain sight for years." "Like a father hiding behind a nickname?" Lily's words cut through the room's tension. She stood, squaring her shoulders. "Mom never said it directly, but she left clues everywhere. A biker who protected her. Money that appeared when we needed it most. Christmas cards with no return address." Mark's hands gripped the windowsill. "Lily, the timing fits," she continued, taking a step toward him. "And now this receipt, with your road name. But mostly—" She paused, gathering courage. "Mostly it's the way you looked at me behind the diner, like you were seeing a ghost." Frank pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly. "Think I'll give you folks a minute." He shuffled toward his bedroom, pausing in the doorway. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we already know in our hearts." The clock on Frank's wall ticked steadily. Outside, the snow fell harder, muffling the sleeping town. Mark's reflection showed a face struggling with words that wouldn't come. Lily moved closer, her reflection joining his in the frosted window. "Mom said the man who helped us was someone who did hard things but had a good heart, that he chose to stay away to keep us safe." Her voice softened. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Mark turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. The hardness he usually wore like armor had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "I didn't know," he said roughly. "Not for certain. Elena, your mother, she never told me." "But you suspected." It wasn't a question. The timing. He ran a hand over his face. "The money I sent through Frank, the way Elena looked at me that last time before she left town." His voice caught. Like she was memorizing something she needed to protect. Lily wrapped her arms around herself, looking suddenly younger. "She protected me by keeping quiet, but she also made sure I could find you if I looked hard enough." She glanced at the receipt on the table. Paper trails. In the distance, church bells began to toll, their deep sounds carrying through the snowy night. Midnight. Christmas morning. "You're my father," Lily said simply, the words changing everything and nothing all at once. Mark stood frozen, the bells continuing their countdown. His hands that had done violence, held secrets, protected from shadows, hung uselessly at his sides. The truth he'd suspected for 15 years, finally spoken aloud by the daughter he'd never dared claim, landed like a physical weight. The 12 bells finished their song, leaving only the soft whisper of falling snow and the sound of two people breathing in a reality forever altered by three small words. The fresh snow crunched beneath their boots as Mark and Lily walked through the empty streets. Christmas lights twinkled from nearby houses, casting colorful shadows on the untouched white blanket covering the sidewalks. Neither had spoken since leaving Frank's apartment. Mark matched his pace to Lily's shorter steps, staying close enough to protect, but far enough to give her space. His motorcycle remained at Frank's. The roads were too dangerous now with the heavy snowfall. The silence between them felt as thick as the falling flakes. Lily pulled her coat tighter, her breath visible in small clouds. The folder of collected receipts and notes poked out from her messenger bag, a physical reminder of what had brought them together on this strange night. She glanced at Mark's profile, studying the sharp line of his jaw, wondering how she hadn't seen the resemblance before. They passed the town's small park, its empty swings moving gently in the winter wind. A plastic Santa stood guard by the gazebo, its red suit dusted with white. Mark noticed Lily shiver and shrugged off his leather jacket without a word, draping it over her shoulders. "I'm okay," she said, but pulled the warm leather closer anyway. It smelled of motor oil and winter air. "Your mother always said that too," Mark replied softly, his first words since they'd left Frank's. "Even when she wasn't." Lily's steps slowed. "Did you love her?" Mark's hands clenched in his pockets. "I respected her. She was brave. Stood up to people most wouldn't." He cleared his throat. "But love? I didn't know how back then. Still learning." They turned onto Cedar Street, where modest houses displayed varying degrees of Christmas cheer. Lily stopped under a streetlight, snow settling in her dark hair. Mom kept every receipt, every note, for 15 years. She believed in leaving signs for people who needed to find their way. "Elena was always smarter than most of us," Mark said. His voice held a gentleness that contrasted with his intimidating appearance. "She saw things others missed." "Like the good in you?" Lily asked. Mark looked away, his shoulders tense. "She saw what she wanted to see." "No," Lily's voice was firm. "Mom never lied to herself. Or to me." She pulled out a crumpled receipt from her bag. "These papers, they tell a story about who you were, who she was, who I am." They started walking again, the snow falling harder now. Mark noticed how Lily walked with her mother's determined stride, head high despite the weight she carried. As they approached her small house, its porch light casting a warm glow on the snow, Mark cleared his throat. "I'll help you follow the rest of the trail. Find whatever Elena left for you to find." He paused at the bottom of her steps. "But I can't. I'm not ready to be what you're hoping for." Lily stood on the first step, bringing them eye level. In the porch light, their matching eyes met, the same shade of gray, the same careful way of watching the world. "Mom used to say that sometimes the bravest thing is just showing up," she said quietly. "That's all I'm asking. Help me understand the story she left behind." Mark nodded once, his expression guarded but gentle. "Tomorrow, then. We'll start with the old church on Mason Street. Elena volunteered there sometimes." Lily handed back his jacket, and for a moment they stood in the falling snow, two people connected by paper trails and untold stories, and a woman who had believed in leaving breadcrumbs of truth for those brave enough to follow them. Lily woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window, the events of last night feeling like a dream. But there on her desk lay the folder of receipts and notes, proof that everything had been real. She sat up slowly, pushing back her dark hair as she looked at the date on her phone. December 25th, 7:23 a.m. The small apartment she shared with her aunt was quiet, though the scent of coffee drifted up from downstairs. Her aunt worked early shifts at the hospital, even on Christmas, leaving Lily alone with her thoughts. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Fresh snow covered everything, pristine and untouched except for a single set of boot prints leading away from their door, evidence of Mark's departure hours ago. Outside town, Mark sat on his parked motorcycle at the empty truck stop overlooking the valley, his breath fogged in the crisp morning air as he watched the sun climb higher over the snow-covered landscape. The coffee in his paper cup had gone cold, forgotten as memories of Elena played through his mind, her quiet strength, the way she'd slip extra food to hungry truckers, how she never asked him why he kept coming back to that diner all those years ago. He pulled out the worn leather wallet from his jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a small photo he'd kept hidden behind his license. Elena stood behind the diner counter, her smile cautious but genuine, her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. He'd told himself he kept the picture as a reminder of a debt paid, but now the truth felt different. Back in her room, Lily carefully arranged the receipts they'd found in chronological order across her bed. Each scrap of paper marked a moment in her mother's life: coffee orders, grocery lists, notes about church events. But now she saw them differently, understanding they were more than just her mother's habit of keeping records. They were breadcrumbs, carefully preserved signposts leading to this Christmas morning. She picked up one receipt, studying her mother's neat handwriting in the margins. G watched from corner booth again. Safe tonight. The date matched what would have been early in Elena's pregnancy. Lily traced the words with her finger, imagining her mother writing them, knowing someday they might matter. Mark revved his bike's engine, the familiar rumble doing nothing to quiet his thoughts. The sun climbed higher, reflecting off chrome and snow. He should leave town. It would be safer for everyone. His life wasn't meant for morning coffee and school pickup times, but Elena's voice echoed in his memory. Sometimes the kindest thing is just being there. He looked down at the photo one more time before tucking it away. The past couldn't be changed, but maybe there was still time to honor Elena's quiet courage with some of his own. Lily sat at her desk, adding new notes to her investigation journal. The pieces fit together now. Why her mother always seemed to check the parking lot before leaving work. Why she'd insisted on teaching Lily to notice details others missed. Why she'd kept every scrap of paper that might someday tell their story. A knock at the front door startled her from her thoughts. Through her window, she could see a familiar motorcycle parked in the street. Mark had come back instead of disappearing. He stood on her porch in the morning light, looking uncertain but present, choosing to stay instead of running from the truth they'd uncovered in last night's snow. The glass door of May's Corner Cafe jingled as Mark held it open for Lily. The small restaurant was one of the few places open on Christmas morning, its windows steamy from the warmth inside. An artificial tree twinkled in the corner, its silver tinsel catching the late morning light. "Just you two?" the hostess asked, grabbing menus. Her smile faltered slightly at Mark's leather jacket and stern expression, but Lily's presence seemed to ease her concern. "Actually," Lily pulled out a worn receipt from her folder, "we're hoping to talk to someone who might have worked here about 8 years ago. The receipt shows my mom used to waitress here." The hostess's eyes lit up. "Oh, you'll want to talk to Betty. She's been here forever." She gestured toward a gray-haired waitress refilling coffee cups at the counter. "Betty, these folks want to ask you something." Betty made her way over, adjusting her glasses as she studied them. She wore a Christmas brooch shaped like a candy cane on her uniform, and her face was lined with laugh wrinkles. "What can I help you with, honey?" Lily held out the receipt. "My mom, Elena Reyes. She worked here around 2015. I was wondering if you remembered her." Betty's face softened with recognition. "Elena?" Oh my goodness, yes. She pulled out a chair and sat down at their table uninvited, her eyes bright with memory. Such a sweet girl. Always came in early to help prep. Never complained about taking the tough shifts. Mark sat quietly, his coffee untouched as he listened. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the worn Formica tabletop. She had this way with the regulars, Betty continued, smiling at Lily. Even the grumpiest ones would brighten up when she served them. And she was so excited when she found out about you, sweetheart. Used to rest her order pad on her belly while she wrote. Said it was practice for when you'd need a desk for homework. Lily blinked rapidly, her hand instinctively reaching for the folder of receipts. Her connection to these moments she'd never known. Did she ever mention why she left? Betty's smile faded slightly. She was private about some things, but I remember she always seemed watchful, like she was carrying something precious she needed to protect. She patted Lily's hand. Which she was, of course. You. Mark shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. He remembered those days, watching Elena from afar, making sure certain people stayed away from the cafe. He'd thought distance was protection then, too. Oh! Betty brightened again. Wait right here. She hurried to the back, returning with a small photo album. We take pictures at all our holiday parties. Here's one from Elena's last Christmas with us. The photograph showed Elena in a red sweater, standing by that same artificial tree. Her smile was gentle, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. Lily leaned closer, drinking in details of her mother she'd never seen before. The way she tilted her head, how her name tag was slightly crooked. She used to sing carols while she worked, Betty remembered fondly. Not loud, just under her breath. Said the holiday season needed more joy, even in small doses. She looked at Lily with warm recognition. You have her eyes, you know. That same kindness in them. Mark watched Lily's face as she absorbed these new pieces of her mother, saw the pride and love bloom there. His coffee had grown cold, much like it had all those years ago when he'd sat in the corner booth, telling himself that staying away was the right thing to do. The basement of Grace Community Church smelled of warm bread and coffee. Wooden tables stretched across the room, each covered with red and green paper tablecloths for the holiday. A few volunteers moved between the tables, serving hot meals to the scattered people seeking refuge from the cold. Mark hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, his leather jacket and heavy boots feeling out of place among the cheerful Christmas decorations. Lily stepped forward, clutching another of her mother's notes, this one mentioning Thursday evening shifts at the church's soup kitchen. Pastor Ruth Coleman greeted them with weathered hands and kind eyes. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple cardigan with a small crosspin. Please, come sit. Everyone's welcome at our table, especially on Christmas. They settled at an empty table, and Ruth brought over 3 bowls of steaming vegetable soup and thick slices of homemade bread. Elena used to make this same bread recipe, she said, sitting across from them. She'd come early just to help bake it fresh. Lily tore off a piece of bread, inhaling its warm scent. Did you know my mom well? She volunteered here for almost 2 years, Ruth said, stirring her soup thoughtfully. Not just serving meals, she'd stay late to help people fill out job applications, practice for interviews, small things that made big differences. Mark kept his eyes on his bowl, but his spoon remained untouched. The steam rose between them like unspoken words. She never talked much about herself, Ruth continued, watching Mark with gentle attention. But she believed strongly in second chances, said everyone deserves the opportunity to choose a better path, no matter their past. Lily leaned forward. Did she ever mention why that was so important to her? Ruth's eyes crinkled with understanding. She spoke about redemption often. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind. The type that happens through small, daily choices to do what's right, even when it's hard. Mark's shoulders tensed. He could feel Ruth's wisdom cutting through his carefully constructed walls. "You know," Ruth said, breaking off a piece of bread, "some people think redemption is about big gestures or complete transformation. But Elena understood it's more about showing up, day after day, choosing to be present in the lives of those who need you." The words hung in the air between them. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the weight of his choices, past and present, pressing down on him. "She used to say that love isn't about being perfect," Ruth continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about being faithful in the small moments, about choosing to stay, even when running feels safer." Lily glanced at Mark, catching the flicker of emotion across his face before he could hide it. "The hardest part of redemption," Ruth said, meeting Mark's eyes directly, "isn't the initial decision to change. It's the daily choice to keep walking that path, especially when doubt tells you you're not worthy of it." Mark pushed his bowl away slightly, his jaw tight. Ruth's words were too close to the fears he'd been carrying. The belief that his past made him unfit for fatherhood. That distance was the only gift he could offer. Elena believed, Ruth finished softly, that true strength isn't in protecting people by staying away. It's in protecting them by staying close, by being steady and present, even when it feels impossible. The basement's warmth suddenly felt stifling to Mark. Ruth's words had stripped away his carefully constructed justifications, leaving him raw with the truth he'd been avoiding. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away. It's choosing to stay. The old Harley rumbled steadily down Highway 12, cutting through bare winter fields. Lily sat behind Mark, her arms wrapped around his waist, protected from the cold by the extra leather jacket he'd pulled from his saddlebag. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted landscape. Mark's mind wandered back to Pastor Ruth's words about daily choices and staying present. The motorcycle's familiar vibration usually brought him peace, but today it felt different with Lily's trust literally in his hands. He adjusted their speed slightly as they passed a patch of ice, his protective instincts kicking in naturally. The receipt in Lily's pocket led them to Sterling, a small town 20 miles east. According to the faded paper, Elena had worked a brief stint at the Blue Plate Special Diner there. Mark remembered the place from his riding days, a 24-hour joint where truckers and night shift workers found refuge in coffee and pie. At a red light, Lily tapped his shoulder. "Mom's note mentions she worked here in February," she said, her voice carrying over the engine's idle. "Said the owner let her pick up extra shifts when she needed them." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of time lost. February, around when Elena would have been showing, trying to save every extra dollar she could. He remembered slipping Frank Heller money to pass along, never knowing if it was enough. The bike's headlight cut through the growing afternoon shadows. Small shops lined the main street, their Christmas decorations twinkling early in the winter dimness. Mark noticed how Lily's grip had relaxed since their morning ride, no longer clutching from uncertainty, but holding on with comfortable familiarity. They passed a small park where a group of kids were building a snowman. Mark felt Lily turn to watch them, and he slowed the bike slightly to give her a better look. It was the kind of simple moment he'd missed in her life. Building snowmen, teaching her to ride a bike, watching school plays. But here she was now, choosing to trust him despite his absence. The thought humbled him. He'd spent years believing his strength lay in his ability to intimidate, to command respect through fear. Yet this quiet afternoon, playing chauffeur to his teenage daughter's investigation, felt more meaningful than any show of power. At another stoplight, he caught their reflection in a storefront window, Father and daughter on a Christmas Day ride. Not the traditional holiday scene, but somehow right. He noticed how naturally Lily had taken to riding, adapting to the bike's movement like she'd been doing it for years, like it was in her blood. The Blue Plate Special's neon sign appeared ahead, still open on Christmas Day. As Mark pulled into the parking lot, he realized he was in no hurry to end their ride. For the first time in years, the open road didn't beckon him toward escape. Instead, he found himself thinking about garage apartments for rent back in town, about jobs that didn't involve midnight runs and club politics, about what it might mean to be available for school events and Sunday dinners. Lily squeezed his shoulder as they parked, a small gesture of appreciation that hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. He helped her off the bike with careful hands that had once been used for such different purposes. She smiled up at him. Not a full smile, not yet, but genuine. And something in his chest tightened with possibility. The diner's windows glowed warm against the deepening afternoon, promising answers about Elena's past. But for a moment, Mark lingered by the bike, watching Lily brush snow from her borrowed jacket, and let himself imagine a future where moments like these weren't just chance encounters, but daily choices. Mark pulled up to a weathered garage on the outskirts of town, its metal door rattling as he lifted it open. The setting sun painted long shadows across the concrete floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the cold air. Lily stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself against the chill, watching as Mark flicked on the overhead lights. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his voice softer than usual. He moved toward a shape in the corner, covered by a heavy tarp. Lily followed, her boots echoing in the cavernous space. Tools lined the walls in neat rows, and the air smelled of motor oil and metal, the scent of purpose and patience. With careful hands, Mark gripped the edge of the tarp and pulled it away. Beneath stood a vintage Triumph motorcycle, its chrome catching the fluorescent light. The bike was partially restored, its tank gleaming deep blue while other parts still showed their age. "I've been working on this one for months," Mark explained, running his hand along the seat. "Started it before." He paused, swallowing hard. "Before I knew about you. Was planning to sell it when it's done." Lily stepped closer, drawn to the machine's quiet beauty. Unlike Mark's intimidating Harley, this bike seemed almost delicate, its lines graceful despite its unfinished state. "It's beautiful," she whispered, reaching out to touch the handlebar. "It's yours," Mark said quietly. "Or rather, what it brings in will be. For college, or whatever you want to do after high school." Lily's hand froze on the cool metal. She looked up at Mark, really studying him for the first time. His face was weathered, marked by years of hard living, but his eyes held something gentle when they met hers. "Mom always said education was freedom," she said, her voice barely audible. "She worked extra shifts, saved everything she could." Mark nodded, moving to the workbench where he picked up a wrench, turning it over in his hands. "Elena was right about that, about a lot of things." "How much?" Lily hesitated, then pressed on. "How much will it bring?" "Restored properly? 20,000, maybe more." He set the wrench down carefully. "These old Triumphs, they're special. Just need someone to see their worth. Put in the time to bring them back." Lily circled the motorcycle slowly, taking in every detail, the missing pieces, the parts waiting to be restored. They didn't make it less valuable, just unfinished. Like her mother's story. Like her relationship with Mark. "Could you..." She cleared her throat. "Could you teach me how to help restore it?" Mark's hands stilled on the workbench. He turned to face her, surprise evident in his features. "You'd want to learn?" Lily nodded, running her fingers along the tank's smooth surface. Mom always said the best things come from working with your hands and your heart. A small smile tugged at the corner of Mark's mouth, the first she'd seen. He reached for a second wrench and held it out to her. We could start now if you want. Nothing major, just basic maintenance. Lily took the wrench, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. She looked at the motorcycle again, but this time she saw more than just metal and chrome. She saw possibilities, a future taking shape from pieces of the past. For the first time since her mother's death, Lily felt her face break into a real smile, not the polite one she gave to concerned teachers, or the brave one she wore for neighbors. This smile came from somewhere deeper, where grief had lived so long it felt like home. But now, standing in this garage with a wrench in her hand and her father beside her, she felt something new taking root alongside the sadness. Hope. Steam rose from white takeout containers spread across Lily's small kitchen table. The Christmas lights from neighboring apartments cast colored shadows through the window, painting the walls in soft reds and greens. Mark sat awkwardly in a chair that seemed too small for his frame, while Lily picked at her lo mein with careful precision. Mom kept everything organized, Lily said, breaking the silence. She gestured toward a shelf lined with labeled folders. Every receipt, every note, every piece of paper that might matter someday, but she never wrote down anything about you. Mark set down his chopsticks, struggling with them anyway. He switched to a plastic fork. She was smart, careful. Writing things down could have been dangerous. Because of the club? Lily's voice was steady, matter of fact. He nodded, pushing rice around his container. The life I lived, still live, it's complicated. People I know, things I've done, they follow you. Elena understood that better than most. She used to jump whenever motorcycles passed by. Lily's words came softer now. I never understood why. She'd grab my hand and pull me inside, even in summer, but she never seemed angry, just worried. Mark's fork stilled. The Christmas lights caught the silver in his beard, making him look older than his years. She had reason to be worried. Back then there were men looking for her. Bad men, the kind that don't forget. Because of you? Because of choices I made. He met her eyes directly. I helped her hide, paid Frank to keep her safe, give her work, but staying close would have led them right to her. Lily wrapped her hands around her cup of tea, seeking its warmth. She used to say sometimes love means letting go. I thought she was talking about my father being dead. She let you believe that to keep you safe. Mark's voice roughened. Elena. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Not the kind of strength that makes noise, but the quiet kind. The kind that endures. Like her volunteering at the shelter? The soup kitchen? Yeah. Mark pushed his container aside. She could have been bitter, could have let fear make her hard. Instead, she chose to help others, to raise you with hope instead of hate. Lily stood suddenly, walking to the window. Christmas lights twinkled across the street, families still celebrating behind warm windows. Did you love her? The question hung in the air, heavy with years of silence. Mark's chair creaked as he shifted. I respected her, he said finally, admired her courage. But love would have meant staying. I wasn't capable of that then. And now? Now I understand what it cost her, what it cost you. He stood, his movements careful in the small space. I told myself staying away was protection. Maybe part of it was. But I was protecting myself too, from changing, from being responsible for someone else's happiness. Lily turned from the window, her face half in shadow. Mom said everyone deserves a second chance, even people who think they don't deserve one. Mark's shoulders tensed, then dropped. Elena always did see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Is that why you stayed away? Because you couldn't see it? The question struck deeper than Mark expected. He looked down at his hands, scarred and weathered from years of working on bikes and fighting battles he now questioned. I stayed away because I thought distance was the same as protection, he admitted, the words feeling incomplete even as he spoke them. I was wrong about a lot of things. The stone church looked smaller in the evening light, its weathered brick walls glowing softly under old copper lamps. Mark sat in his idling truck across the street, watching people file inside through stained glass reflections. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He'd promised Lily he'd come. But churches made him uneasy. Too many memories of disappointed faces and whispered judgments. The parking lot was half full, mostly older sedans dusted with melting snow. His black truck stood out like a shadow against their muted colors. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily. I'm inside. Third pew from the front. Mark switched off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy with expectation. He wasn't dressed for church, worn jeans, work boots, and his least threatening leather jacket. But Lily hadn't asked him to change. She'd just asked him to come. The church steps were cleared of snow but still slick with ice. Mark caught himself on the iron railing, the metal cold against his palm. Through the heavy wooden doors, he could hear soft organ music and murmured conversations. Inside, the air smelled of pine garlands and burning wax. Dozens of small candles flickered in red glass holders near the altar. People turned to look as he entered, some curious, others wary. He kept his eyes forward, scanning the pews until he spotted Lily's dark hair. She sat alone, a white candle cupped in her hands. Her mother's old blue sweater hung loose on her shoulders. When she saw Mark, her face brightened with relief. You came, she whispered as he slid into the pew beside her. Said I would. His voice felt too rough for the quiet space. Pastor Ruth moved through the congregation, touching shoulders and sharing quiet words. When she reached their pew, she smiled warmly. Lily, dear, and Mark, welcome. Elena always loved this service. Mark nodded, unable to find the right words. Lily's hand brushed his arm. Mom came every year after Christmas. She said it was important to remember people, even when it hurts. The organ music softened to a gentle hymn. Pastor Ruth moved to the altar, her silver hair catching the candlelight. We gather tonight to remember those we've lost, to honor their memory with light in the darkness. One by one, people rose to light their candles. Some walked alone, others in pairs or family groups. Each flame added warmth to the growing glow near the altar. Lily stood, her candle steady in her hands. She paused, looking down at Mark. Will you come with me? The question carried more weight than just those simple words. In the soft light, her eyes held the same quiet strength he'd seen in Elena. Coming here was one thing. Standing beside Lily publicly was another. It meant being seen, being known, being claimed as family. Mark's throat tightened. He glanced around the church, feeling exposed. But Lily waited patiently, offering him the choice Elena never could. Slowly, carefully, he rose. Together they walked to the altar. Lily's candle joined the others, its flame dancing among dozens of lights. She spoke softly. For Mom. Then she stepped back, making space for Mark to stand beside her. Not behind her in shadows, not watching from a distance, but next to her in the warm glow of remembered love. For the first time since entering the church, Mark's shoulders relaxed. They stood together, father and daughter, while the candlelight painted everything in gentle gold. Mark's truck rumbled through the empty streets after leaving the church service. The dashboard clock blinked 9:47 p.m., and a light snow had started falling again. His phone vibrated against the seat, a number he hadn't seen in months. He pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store, cut the engine, and stared at the still buzzing phone. The club rarely called unless something was wrong. After 3 more rings, he answered. "Yeah." His voice came out gruff, defensive. "Grim." Tank's familiar growl crackled through the speaker. "Been hearing things. Interesting things." Mark's jaw tightened. Tank was the club's sergeant-at-arms, responsible for discipline and security. He didn't make social calls. "That right?" Mark kept his tone neutral, watching snowflakes drift through the cone of yellow streetlight. "Word's getting around about you spending time with some girl, digging into old business." Tank paused meaningfully. "Elena Reyes's kid." The name hit Mark like a physical blow. He hadn't told anyone about Lily, hadn't even mentioned Elena's name in years. But small towns had long memories, and bikers had longer ones. "Ain't your concern," Mark said firmly. Tank's laugh was sharp and humorless. "See, that's where you're wrong, brother, because some people are asking questions. Remember that mess with the Rivers crew back then, when Elena disappeared?" Mark's free hand clenched into a fist. The Rivers were a rival club that had tried moving into their territory years ago. Things had gotten ugly. Really ugly. "That's ancient history," Mark said. "Not to everyone. Rivers got some new blood now. Young guys looking to make names for themselves. And here you are, suddenly spending Christmas with Elena's daughter." Snow collected on the truck's windshield, building up in silent layers. Mark thought of Lily standing beside him at the church. How natural it had felt. How right. Now that moment felt fragile, threatened. "I'm handling it," Mark said. "Are you?" Tank's voice hardened. "Because from where we're sitting, you're getting sloppy, soft, drawing attention we don't need." "That a threat?" "It's a reality check, brother. You start playing house with this girl, people notice. Wrong people. And maybe they start wondering what else you know about back then. What secrets might come spilling out." Mark stared through the snow-streaked windshield, seeing nothing. The past he'd tried to outrun was circling back, bringing shadows with it. Lily didn't know about the violence, the retribution, the real reason Elena had fled. She couldn't know. "I'll deal with it," Mark said finally. "See that you do." Tank's voice went quiet, dangerous. "Clean this up, Grim, before someone else decides to." The line went dead. Mark sat in the dark truck, listening to the soft tick of the cooling engine. The phone's screen showed 9:53 p.m., 6 minutes that had changed everything. He thought of Lily's face in the candlelight, full of trust and hope. Thought of Elena, who'd understood the danger well enough to disappear. The Rivers crew was ruthless, eager to settle old scores. And now they knew about Lily. Mark started the truck, snow sliding off the windshield. The streets were empty, peaceful. But he knew better now. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were making plans, nursing grudges, seeing opportunities for revenge. The quiet Christmas peace he'd found with Lily felt suddenly as fragile as the melting snowflakes on his windshield. The old clock on Lily's kitchen wall ticked softly toward 5 a.m. Mark sat in a worn armchair, watching his daughter sleep on the couch. She hadn't wanted to be alone after the church service, so he'd stayed, telling himself it was just one more night. Lily's face looked peaceful in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Her dark hair fell across her cheek, and her hand clutched a small throw pillow. A worn quilt, probably Elena's, covered her shoulders. Even in sleep, she had her mother's quiet strength. Mark's chest ached. In just a few days, this girl had worked her way into his heart, filling an empty space he hadn't known was there. He'd started imagining a different kind of life, weekend breakfasts, school events, teaching her about motorcycles, normal things, dad things. But Tank's warning echoed in his mind. The Rivers crew was watching, waiting. They'd use any excuse to settle old scores, and Lily would make the perfect target. She had no idea what kind of violence her father was capable of, what he'd done to protect the club's territory. The thought of that darkness touching her made him feel sick. Through the window, the sky was turning gray. Dawn wasn't far off. Mark stood carefully, trying not to let the chair creak. He moved closer to the couch, memorizing Lily's face. She looked so young, so vulnerable, just like Elena had, all those years ago. On the coffee table lay the stack of receipts and notes they'd collected. Lily had organized them carefully, creating a paper trail of her mother's life. Mark picked up one receipt, the one with his road name scribbled on it. The name that had brought them together and would now drive them apart. He pulled out his wallet and removed everything in it, about $600. It wasn't much, but it would help. He placed the money under the receipt, his hands shaking slightly. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible. Mark froze, but she didn't wake. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the room for a moment before leaving them in shadow again. He should write a note, try to explain. But what could he say? That he was leaving to protect her? That loving her meant walking away? The words felt hollow, just like they had when he'd abandoned Elena. History repeating itself in the cruelest way. The sky was lighter now. Mark took his leather jacket from the chair, sliding it on silently. His boots felt heavy as he moved toward the door. Each step away from Lily hurt like a physical wound. At the door, he paused for one last look. Lily slept on, unaware that her father was choosing absence over presence again. The morning light was beginning to soften her features, making her look even more like Elena. "I'm sorry, kid," he whispered. He closed the door with exquisite care, not letting the latch click. The hallway was empty and silent. His boots made no sound on the worn carpet as he walked away, his shoulders hunched against a weight heavier than any he'd carried before. Outside, frost covered his motorcycle seat. The sun wasn't up yet, but the eastern sky showed hints of pink above the buildings. Mark started his bike, the familiar rumble doing nothing to comfort him. Without looking back at Lily's window, he pulled away from the curb. The empty streets welcomed him back to solitude as he pointed his bike toward the highway. Behind him, the town was beginning to wake, but Mark was already gone, choosing the road over love one more time. Morning light filtered through thin curtains as Lily stirred on the couch. Her neck was stiff from sleeping at an awkward angle, and the quilt had slipped halfway to the floor. For a moment, she stayed still, listening for movement in the apartment. Silence. "Mark?" she called out softly, pushing herself up to sitting. The armchair where he'd been watching over her was empty, the cushion still holding a faint impression of where he'd sat. Her heart started beating faster. The kitchen was untouched, coffee maker cold and unused. His leather jacket wasn't hanging by the door where it had been last night. Lily walked through each small room of the apartment, her bare feet quiet on the cold floor, though she already knew what she'd find. Nothing. Back in the living room, she noticed the stack of receipts on the coffee table looked different. Moving closer, she saw money tucked underneath, 6 crumpled $100 bills. Her throat tightened as she picked them up with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Lily searched the table frantically, looking for a note, a message, any explanation. The receipts scattered across the surface as her movements became more desperate. Some fluttered to the floor, but she barely noticed. She checked between the couch cushions, under the coffee table, in the kitchen. Maybe he'd left a message on her phone? But there were no texts, no missed calls, no voicemails, just empty screens staring back at her. The silence in the apartment grew heavier. Lily stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around herself, trying to make sense of it. Yesterday had felt so real, standing together in the church, his solid presence beside her as she lit the candle for her mom. The way he'd helped her trace Elena's path through town, patient and gentle despite his intimidating appearance. She'd started to believe, started to hope. Moving to the window, Lily looked down at the street. The space where his motorcycle had been parked was empty now, just like everything else. Fresh tire tracks in the frost showed where he'd pulled away, already disappearing as the morning sun melted the evidence of his departure. Her reflection in the window looked young and lost. Lily pressed her forehead against the cold glass, remembering how her mother used to do the same thing on quiet mornings. Had Elena stood like this too, watching Mark drive away all those years ago? The money on the coffee table seemed to mock her. Just like that, she was back to being the girl with only paper trails and questions. Except now the hurt was sharper, fresher. This time she'd seen him leave with her own eyes, or rather, hadn't seen him leave at all. He'd slipped away while she slept, not even brave enough to say goodbye. Lily's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor beneath the window. The first sob caught her by surprise, ripping from her throat with unexpected force. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold it in, but it was too late. The tears came fast and hot, blurring her vision as she curled into herself. This was worse than not knowing, worse than wondering. He'd seen her, known her, and still chosen to leave. Just like he'd left her mother. Just like everyone seemed to leave. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars passed, people walked their dogs, the world kept turning. But inside the apartment, Lily sat alone with her grief, surrounded by scattered receipts and the hollow space where hope had been. A knock at the door startled Lily from her daze. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the scattered receipts without really seeing them. The winter afternoon light was already starting to fade. "Lily?" Pastor Ruth's gentle voice carried through the door. "May I come in, dear?" Lily hesitated, then walked over and turned the lock. Pastor Ruth stood in the hallway, her silver hair neat under a worn knit cap, holding a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread. "I had a feeling," Ruth said softly, taking in Lily's tear-stained face and rumpled clothes. "May I?" Lily stepped back wordlessly, letting the older woman enter. Ruth set the bag on the counter and began unwrapping what turned out to be still warm banana bread. The familiar, sweet smell filled the small kitchen. "I noticed you weren't at the youth group lunch," Ruth said, cutting 2 thick slices. "And when I called the garage where Mark was staying, no one answered." Lily's throat tightened at his name. "He left," she managed to say. "Just disappeared while I was sleeping." Ruth's weathered hands stilled on the bread knife. "Oh, child." "He left money," Lily continued, her voice bitter. "Like that makes up for anything." She gestured at the crumpled bills still lying on the coffee table. Ruth moved to the couch, patting the space beside her. After a moment, Lily joined her, accepting a piece of the banana bread, though she couldn't imagine eating. "Your mother used to make this recipe," Ruth said quietly. "Did you know that? She'd bake it for the church suppers, always adding extra walnuts because she knew I loved them." Lily shook her head, running her finger along the bread's crust. Elena understood something about love that took me years to learn, Ruth continued. She knew it wasn't about grand gestures or even good intentions. It was about showing up, day after day, in the small moments. Reaching into her bag, Ruth pulled out a sealed envelope, slightly yellowed with age. Your mother left this with me about a month before she passed. She said I'd know when it was time to share it. Lily took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her mother's neat handwriting. My dearest Lily, if he ever finds you, tell him this. Being present matters more than being powerful. I learned that watching him try to protect us through distance, thinking strength meant staying away. But true strength is choosing to remain, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. Love isn't about having enough power to keep someone safe. It's about having enough courage to stay beside them through whatever comes. I hope someday he understands that. The words blurred as fresh tears filled Lily's eyes. Ruth's arm came around her shoulders, steady and warm. Your mother knew something else too, Ruth said gently. She knew that sometimes people need time to learn how to love properly, to understand that protection isn't always what we think it is. Lily leaned into Ruth's embrace, the letter clutched in her hands. Her mother's words seemed to shift something inside her, not erasing the pain of Mark's departure, but changing its shape somehow. The hurt was still there, but now it felt less like abandonment and more like a lesson half learned. He thought he was protecting me, Lily whispered, just like he did with Mom. Ruth nodded. The question is, will he learn what your mother tried to teach him? That sometimes the bravest thing isn't riding away into the sunset. It's simply staying put. The winter sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty highway. Mark hunched over his motorcycle, the familiar rumble beneath him no longer bringing the comfort it once did. His hands were numb inside his gloves, but he barely noticed the cold. Mile markers flashed past, each one carrying him further from Lily, but the distance didn't ease the weight in his chest. The image of her sleeping form on the couch kept appearing in his mind, peaceful, trusting, unaware he was about to disappear just like everyone else in her life had. A semi-truck roared past in the opposite direction, the blast of air buffeting him. Mark adjusted his grip on the handlebars, remembering how Elena used to grip them just as tightly during those few rides he gave her years ago. She'd laugh nervously, her voice carried away by the wind, but she never asked him to slow down. The memory shifted to Lily's face when she'd found that receipt with his road name. Her eyes had held the same quiet determination as her mother's, that stubborn refusal to look away from hard truths. Both of them had seen past his carefully maintained facade of danger and distance. Mark pulled off at a rest stop, killing the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around him as he sat there, staring at nothing. A few other vehicles dotted the parking lot. A minivan with a sleeping family inside, a long-haul trucker catching some rest, everyone passing through but never staying. Just like him. He'd spent years convincing himself that the road was freedom, that movement meant safety, that distance was the same thing as protection. The club had reinforced that belief. Never stay too long, never put down roots, never give anyone the power to hold you in place. But now, sitting alone in the gathering dusk, the highway stretching endlessly before him, Mark felt something he'd never experienced before on the road. Emptiness. The promise of endless movement felt hollow. Each mile marker seemed to mock him, measuring not freedom but fear. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over Lily's number. He'd programmed it in just yesterday, though it felt like a lifetime ago. The screen's glow illuminated his face in the growing darkness as he stared at those digits, remembering how Lily had carefully written them down for him. Just in case, she'd said, trying to sound casual, but hope bleeding through. The same hope he'd seen in Elena's eyes years ago when she'd asked him to stay. He'd convinced himself then that leaving was an act of love, that his absence would keep them safer than his presence ever could. But Elena's quiet strength had never needed his protection. She'd needed his presence. And now Lily, with that same steel in her spine, that same gentle determination, was asking for the same thing without words. Mark pocketed the phone and kicked the motorcycle back to life. But the familiar surge of power felt different now. The vibration that had always meant escape now felt like running. The open road that had promised freedom now seemed to taunt him with its emptiness. He'd spent so many years believing that the road was home. That movement was safety. That distance was strength. But sitting there in the growing dark, watching headlights sweep past like ghosts, Mark finally understood. The road wasn't offering him peace anymore. It was just offering him somewhere else to hide. The clubhouse loomed before Mark, its weathered exterior unchanged since he'd first walked through those doors 15 years ago. Christmas decorations hung awkwardly from the eaves, a half-hearted attempt at normalcy that only made the place feel more threatening. The parking lot was nearly empty, just the officers' bikes lined up like sentinels. Mark's hands were steady as he pulled off his helmet. He'd made his choice somewhere between midnight and dawn, between running and returning. The weight of his leather cut felt heavier than usual on his shoulders. Inside, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. 4 men sat around the scarred wooden table, the club's leadership council. Thunder, the president, raised his beer in greeting, but his eyes were hard. "Grim," Thunder said, using the road name that no longer fit. "Heard you found something interesting on your Christmas run." Mark stood straight, keeping his voice level. "Not hear about that." Snake, the vice president, leaned forward. His tattooed fingers drummed against the table. "Girl's got quite a story going around. Elena Reyes's kid, right? Funny how things circle back." "I'm here to turn in my colors," Mark said quietly. The words landed like stones in still water. Thunder's beer bottle hit the table with a thud. Snake's drumming fingers went still. 15 years, Thunder said slowly. "That's what you've given this club. And now you want to walk away over some kid?" Mark shrugged out of his leather cut, the movement familiar yet final. The patches caught the dim light, the wings, the skull, the territory markers. Each one had been earned through blood and loyalty, through choices he couldn't undo. "My choice," Mark said. "Clean break, no drama." Snake stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know it ain't that simple, brother. Club's got enemies. Enemies got long memories." "I'm not your brother anymore," Mark replied, laying his cut on the table. The leather seemed to sigh as it settled. "And I'm not asking permission. I'm showing respect by doing this proper." Thunder studied him for a long moment. The club president had aged since Mark first met him, lines etched deeper around his eyes, but his gaze was still sharp as broken glass. "You really think you can walk away?" Thunder asked. "Be some regular Joe? Push paper, punch a clock, play daddy?" "I think I can try," Mark said. The silence stretched. Mark felt the weight of history pressing down. Every ride, every fight, every promise made in blood and kept in pain. But underneath that weight was something lighter, something that felt like hope. "Your call," Thunder finally said. He picked up Mark's cut, running his thumb over the patches. "But remember, world out there ain't built for men like us. Civilians don't understand what we know, what we've done." "Maybe that's why it's worth trying," Mark said. He turned toward the door, his back feeling strangely exposed without the familiar weight of leather. But his steps were steady, his shoulders straight. Behind him, he heard Snake mutter something about loyalty, heard Thunder's grunt of dismissal. The winter air hit him as he stepped outside, clean and sharp in his lungs. His bike waited, stripped of club markings now, just transportation instead of identity. The sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the chrome to fire. Mark swung his leg over the seat, feeling lighter than he had in years. The engine caught on the first try, its rumble different now. Not an anthem of rebellion, but simply the sound of movement, of choice, of change. He pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. The club's shadow fell away behind him, and for the first time in 15 years, the road ahead felt like a beginning instead of an escape. The first sunrise of the year painted Lily's neighborhood in gentle gold. Mark sat on his idling motorcycle, watching early morning shadows stretch across empty streets. Holiday decorations still hung from lampposts, their cheerful colors faded and worn like his own resolve. 4 days had passed since he'd surrendered his colors. 4 days of driving through back roads and small towns, sleeping in cheap motels when exhaustion forced him to stop. Each mile had brought him closer to this moment, to this choice. He killed the engine and listened to the quiet. A few blocks away, he could see the corner of Lily's apartment building rising above the trees. His hands, usually steady on the handlebars, felt uncertain as he pulled off his gloves. The temperature had risen above freezing, turning yesterday's snow to brown slush along the curbs. Mark's boots left heavy prints as he walked, each step deliberate. He'd stripped his bike of club insignia, traded his leather cut for a plain black jacket. The change felt both foreign and right, like breaking a bone to let it heal straight. An old woman walked her dog on the opposite sidewalk, eyeing him warily. Once, that wariness would have satisfied him. Fear meant distance. Distance meant safety. Now it just felt hollow. He nodded politely as they passed, and her surprise showed in the slight widening of her eyes. The closer he got to Lily's building, the more his pace slowed. What right did he have to return? He'd run when she needed him most, just like he'd done 15 years ago. The fact that he'd left to protect her didn't change the abandonment. Elena's choice echoed in his mind. She'd kept Lily safe by staying quiet, staying hidden. But Pastor Ruth's words haunted him too. Being present matters more than being powerful. Maybe they'd both been wrong. Maybe real protection meant showing up, day after day, through fear and doubt and consequence. A car alarm chirped nearby, making him flinch. Old habits died hard. He scanned the street automatically, checking sight lines and escape routes. But there were no threats here, just early risers heading to work, garbage trucks making their rounds, life moving forward like it always did. The steps to Lily's building felt steeper than he remembered. Inside, the hallway smelled of pine cleaner and someone's breakfast coffee. His footsteps echoed off the walls as he climbed to the 3rd floor. He passed the window where he'd watched her study that last night, before fear had driven him away. The same chemistry textbook probably still lay on her desk, pages marked with careful notes. She approached everything that way, methodically, thoughtfully, with a determination that reminded him painfully of her mother. Mark stopped outside her door, apartment 3C. The brass numbers were slightly tarnished, the paint around them chipped. Such a normal door to feel so impossible. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. What could he possibly say? Sorry wouldn't cover it. Promises would ring hollow. He had no right to ask for trust he hadn't earned. But he could offer presence. He could show up today and tomorrow and every day after, until presence became proof. He could choose to stay, even when staying felt impossible. The morning light crept down the hallway, touching the door with gentle insistence. Somewhere inside, Lily was starting her new year, maybe still sleeping, maybe already awake and studying. maybe hating him, maybe hoping he'd return. He couldn't control her response. He could only control his choice. Mark took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The door opened slowly, revealing Lily's face. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her usual composure cracked by days of uncertainty. She didn't speak, just stood there holding the doorframe like it could steady her world. "I shouldn't have left," Mark said quietly. His voice felt rough from disuse. "Not like that, not without explaining." Lily's jaw tightened. "No, you shouldn't have." The hallway suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Mark shifted his weight, fighting the urge to retreat. "Can I come in? Just to talk?" She studied him for a long moment, then stepped back without a word. The apartment looked exactly as he remembered. Textbooks stacked neatly on the coffee table. Elena's photo smiling from the wall. Everything in its proper place. Except him. "I got scared," he admitted, staying near the door. "Word got back to the club about you, about us. There are people who'd use you to hurt me, people I can't always stop." "So you ran." The words came out flat, factual. "Just like before." Mark nodded, not defending himself. "I thought distance would keep you safe, like your mother did. But I was wrong." "Mom had no choice," Lily said, wrapping her arms around herself. "She was alone. You're not." "No, I'm not." He took a careful breath. "Pastor Ruth showed me something Elena wrote, about presence mattering more than power." A flash of recognition crossed Lily's face. "She gave you the note?" "She did, and she was right. Both of them were right." Mark gestured helplessly. "I spent years thinking protection meant keeping my distance, but maybe real protection is just being here, even when it's hard, even when it's scary." Lily moved to the window, looking out at the brightening morning. "I don't need a protector. I need a father who shows up." "I know." Mark stayed where he was, giving her space. "I left the club, for good this time. No more colors, no more road name." She turned back to him, surprise breaking through her careful mask. "You quit?" "4 days ago. That's where I've been, making it official, cutting ties." He met her eyes steadily. "I can't undo the past, can't change who I was or what I did, but I can choose who I am now." Lily was quiet for a long time, processing. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "If you stay, there have to be rules." Mark nodded. "Name them." "No more disappearing. If something's wrong, you tell me, even if you think it's protecting me." "Agreed." "And no lies." Her eyes hardened. "Mom had her reasons for keeping secrets, but I'm not a little kid anymore. I need the truth, even when it's ugly." "You'll get it," Mark promised. "All of it." Lily uncrossed her arms slowly. "And you have to actually be here, not just physically. Mom's notes, the receipts, she left those because she wanted me to understand her choices, to know her story." She swallowed hard. "I need to know yours too. The real story, not just the reputation." Mark felt something tight in his chest loosen. "I can do that. It'll take time, but I can do that." "Time I've got," Lily said. "Just don't waste it." She moved to the kitchen counter and pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind she used for her methodical receipt sorting. Opening to the first clean page, she wrote the date at the top. "Start with the day you met Mom," she said, pen poised, "and don't leave anything out." Mark looked at her there, Elena's daughter through and through, turning even pain into purpose. He pulled up a chair and began to speak. On a cold Monday morning in January, Mark pulled his weathered pickup truck into Johnson's auto repair. The worn brick building sat 3 blocks from Lily's school, close enough to be there quickly if needed, far enough to give her space. The owner, Pete Johnson, looked up from a stack of invoices as the bell chimed. "You're early," Pete said, checking his watch. "Wasn't expecting you till 8. "Figured I'd get a head start," Mark replied, shrugging off his heavy coat. The garage smelled of oil and metal, familiar comfort in its simplicity. That afternoon, he left work exactly at 3, changed out of his coveralls, and walked to Lily's debate team practice. He sat in the back row of the auditorium, just watching. When she glanced up and saw him, her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't miss a beat in her argument about environmental policy. Wednesday brought his first paycheck. Honest work, modest pay. He cashed it and stopped by the grocery store, filling Lily's nearly empty fridge while she was at school. No note, no fanfare. Just food where it was needed. The following Monday, he arrived at her swim meet 10 minutes early, found a quiet corner in the bleachers. Lily cut through the water with Elena's determination, placing 3rd in her event. He waited until she saw him before leaving, offering a small nod. She returned it, the barest hint of a smile crossing her face. By the 3rd week, their routine had settled into comfortable patterns. Mornings, he'd wave as she walked past the garage on her way to school. Afternoons, he'd be there. Homework help if she asked, silence if she didn't. When she stayed late for study groups, he'd work late too, keeping the garage lights on until she passed by. One Thursday, Pete caught him checking his phone between oil changes. "Got somewhere to be?" the older man asked. "Parent-teacher conferences tonight," Mark said quietly. "Want to make sure I'm cleaned up in time." Pete nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take off early if you need to." The conference room felt too small for Mark's frame, the plastic chairs clearly designed for someone else. But he sat and listened as teachers praised Lily's focus, her resilience, her drive. He didn't speak much, just absorbed their words, storing them away like treasure. February brought college preparation meetings. Mark sat beside Lily as the guidance counselor discussed SAT dates and application deadlines. His presence spoke volumes, not controlling, not directing, just supporting whatever path she chose. Some days were harder than others. When Lily was quiet, lost in grief for Elena, Mark simply worked nearby, giving her space to feel without feeling alone. When his old life tried calling, he let it ring through, choosing instead to help Lily with her chemistry homework or listen to her practice debate speeches. Small moments built trust gradually. A shared coffee on cold mornings, quick texts when plans changed, the steady rhythm of showing up day after day without demands or drama. One afternoon in late February, Lily stopped by the garage after school. Mark was under a car, focused on a stubborn bolt. "There's a father-daughter dance next month," she said to his boots, the only part visible. "At school. You don't have to go. I just thought you should know." Mark rolled out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. "What time?" 7, on the 18th. She shifted her backpack. "It's probably boring." "I'll be there," he said simply. "Want me to rent a suit?" Lily's smile, small but real, warmed the chilly garage. "Maybe just a clean shirt." She turned to leave, then paused. "Thanks for being here. Every day." Mark watched her go, understanding that some victories came not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency, in the steady choice to remain present in the small moments that built trust day by day. Spring sunlight filtered through fresh leaves as Mark's pickup truck rumbled to a stop outside Riverside Cemetery. The morning dew still clung to the grass, creating tiny rainbows where the light touched. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding a small bouquet of yellow daisies, Elena's favorites. Mark turned off the engine but didn't move. Through the windshield, rows of granite headstones stretched across the gentle slope. He'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, but this moment made his hands tremble on the steering wheel. "We can wait a bit," Lily said softly, understanding in her voice. He shook his head. No, she waited long enough. They walked together through the iron gates, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Lily led the way, familiar with the route. Mark followed, his leather jacket feeling too heavy for the mild morning. Elena's grave sat beneath a young maple tree. The headstone was simple, her name, the dates, and the words, "Beloved Mother." Fresh grass had just begun growing over the plot, nature's gentle blanket. Lily knelt and arranged the daisies in the stone vase. Her fingers traced the engraved letters of her mother's name. "I used to come here alone," she said. "Every Sunday after church. I'd tell her about my week, pretend she could hear me." Mark stood behind her, his shadow falling across the grass. "She heard you," he said. "Elena always listened." "She kept your secret," Lily said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "Even here, even when it was just us, she never said your name. Just that you'd done the right thing, even if it hurt." Mark knelt beside her, his knee touching the earth where Elena rested. "She was stronger than me," he admitted. "Braver too. I ran because I was scared. She stayed because she loved you more than her fear." Lily pulled a folded paper from her pocket, one of Elena's old receipts, worn soft from handling. "This was the last one I found," she said. "From the day before she got sick. She'd written something on the back." She handed it to Mark. His hands were steady now as he unfolded it. Elena's handwriting was delicate but clear. "Love isn't what you say or what you feel. It's what you choose every day." The words hit him like a physical force. All those years on the road, building his reputation as grim, the enforcer everyone feared, none of it meant anything compared to Elena's quiet courage, her daily choice to love through action. "I'm done being grim," he said, the words coming naturally. "That name, that life, it's not who I am anymore." He pulled his old club patch from his jacket pocket, the name Grim embroidered in faded thread. He'd carried it since leaving the club, a habit he couldn't break until now. Lily watched as he dug a small hole beside Elena's headstone with his hands. The patch went in, and he covered it with earth. No ceremony, no dramatic gestures. Just like Elena would have done. A quiet choice made with certainty. "Just Mark?" Lily asked. He nodded, brushing dirt from his hands. "Just Mark, Elena's friend, your father. That's enough." They sat together as morning deepened around them, sharing memories of Elena, her laugh, her kindness, the way she hummed while cooking. The man who used to be grim faded with each story, replaced by something harder but better. A father who learned to stay. End of Scene 1.